from ACS. And so I played softball with Solange, graduated high school with Stash, and then worked with Nikki.
You just a small world. Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's right. Was that at Covenant, Kim?
Well, we went to Aurora Christian High School.
Okay, got it. Okay. Oh, that's so cool.
But yes, I did also go to Covenant. They did not, but Aurora Christian High School is where we graduated.
Oh, that's so cool. I love it.
Well, it is 6:32, and I'm going to get started because I want Dr. Rendall to have all the time he wants to take tonight because I'm so excited about introducing him. And he's just been so gracious when I extended the invitation for Friday night chats. I don't know if everybody knows my story, but it was right before I went to church, and I was talking to God, just having an open conversation, and he was prompting my spirit to reach out to Dr. Rendall. And I was like, I'm on my way to church. What is this? And this was during COVID. So, we are responsible for doing all of the videotaping, the editing, and it was just my husband and myself. So if I led the scripture in prayer, he was on camera, and then we reversed it. And so I could not get up from my desk until I reached out to him. And so by the time we live on the church campus, so by the time I left my house and walked about, 100 feet to the church, I started screaming. And I read his response because absolutely, I so appreciated that he was so gracious to come on board and be a part of this. And no, Jamie, I did not leverage, the Judson University connection, but it helped. But just so excited. When I read his books, the first one, The 4 Factors of Effective Leadership, I was amazed by the 4 I's. And then the freak factor for kids. And the reason I was so in tune with that book is because some of the things I could identify with growing up myself. And I was just going back and I was just rummaging through some high school pictures. And I remember, Dr. Rendall, when I would just peep into other classes just to say, why can't I get to that level? What's wrong with me? So I don't know if it was the executive function or ADHD or what was going on, but my learning process was so different. And so I was very, very happy with my high school experience because we had such a strong community, but there were some levels that I could not reach at that age, and it just saddened me, and particularly during 1970s, because that was a time for African Americans. Either you are relegated to go to a trade school, and then some, were encouraged to go to college. And so for me, a good typist was the recommendation my advisor gave me. But just to know and have that experience, and you see the literature now in terms of oppositional defiance or ADHD or some of those things, or even your executive functions, how those things play into the development of the child. And it can cause some drama because if you're sitting in a classroom and you think differently and you can't focus and you're bored to tears, you're not sitting there thinking, I'm a genius,
And no one else is thinking that either. Yeah.
It's gonna happen later for me. You're not thinking, and certainly your teacher's not thinking that. So, but my family was a very strong family, and so whether you received that C or whatever, the effort you celebrated it, but in my spirit, there was so much more. And so everything is in God's timing, but just to go through those steps. And when I saw your book, I said, oh my goodness, I'm going to use this for my kids here. So we actually, I conducted the survey, and some of the answers were amazing because it gave me insight as to how they think about themselves at such a young age. And so I appreciate you being here. So let me just tell you a little bit about his genius. If you don't mind, I will brag on you. So Dr. Rendall has spoken on every continent. He was a guest speaker for TEDxMcHenry, TEDxZurich. He has clients such as the U.S. Air Force, the Australian government, the Fortune 500 companies such as Microsoft, AT&T, United Health Group, Fannie Mae, and State Farm. this is the thing, Dr. Rendall, that really, really struck me, because he was an associate professor, an assistant professor. But this is the thing that really struck me, was when you it was Serve Enterprises, SERVE, where you were director and you developed and managed businesses that employed people with developmental disabilities.
Yep.
That caught my heart, because that was so impressive, because you have a wealth of resources of individuals who want to do better, but may not have the skill set to do better, or for somebody to encourage them to go on, think differently, learn differently, and celebrate yourself.
Yeah.
So your book, Discovering Uniqueness by Flaunting Your Weakness, is amazing to me. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank
and
you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I actually started helping people with disabilities straight out of college at Judson. I got a job after I graduated at Little City Foundation in Palatine.
Yeah.
And I was a transitional case manager, so I helped kids in special education to get job opportunities. So we worked at Allstate and Claire's and Target and different places throughout the suburbs. And that's actually where part of this came from, and I'll come back to that. But part of this idea is that we don't need to sometimes fix our weaknesses. In fact, not only should we not fix them, we should oftentimes amplify them or exaggerate them or embrace them. And that sounds ridiculous on its face. But one of the things I learned helping people specifically with developmental disabilities is there is no cure for a developmental disability. And one of the things that makes a developmental disability is oftentimes the person simply cannot do certain things. It isn't a matter of effort or training or teaching. The person just doesn't have the actual capacity to do certain things. And so my job was to help people get jobs. And instead of thinking like, okay, how do I change this person to turn them into the right kind of employee? I realized the only two things that mattered, again, specifically in that context, is what can they do and what do they like to do? What can they do and what do they like to do? And as I left that context, I realized that's kind of true for the rest of us. We say things like you have unlimited potential and all these kinds of things. And I think we do have unlimited potential to serve God. We had unlimited potential to be happy and fulfilled and succeed and serve others and all sorts of things. But I'm never going to be a figure skating champion. I'm never going to be an offensive lineman for the Green Bay Packers. There's all sorts of things we can't do. There's all sorts of things God didn't make us to do. And I think ultimately what I learned working with people with disabilities, I think is more true of the rest of us than we like to believe. When somebody says you can be whatever you want to be, that's rarely true. You can be a lot of things. You have tremendous potential. You can be more than maybe you thought you could, but I'm 6'6". I'm never going to be a jockey and ride a horse to victory in the Kentucky Derby. And that's not because I'm not trying hard enough. It's because I'm 6'6" and jockeys are 4'2". And so when we tell people, you can be whatever you want to be, and when we think that, it's actually paralyzing instead of freeing, because if you could in fact be anything, then how do you choose? And how much time do you spend on any of those particular pursuits before you move on to something else or give up? And so that beginning actually really helped me develop this perspective. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right, so I'll just jump in with the freak factor, and then Karen and I, we're planning to do some Q&A at the end. If you have things you're just dying to ask along the way, you can do that. I may or may not jump around, but we're just going to do about 25 minutes here, and then we'll jump into questions. So I want you to have the basics of the freak factor, and then we'll kind of you can quiz me on it a little bit. So I actually call this the freak factor because if any of you know Elliot Anderson, I worked for Elliot Anderson doing home services while I was in school there, and I was a resident assistant in the men's dorm. And we would do painting as one of the things we'd do, and sometimes the people would see me, and like I said, I'm 6'6", and they'd say, "Oh, it's nice you've got him with you. You don't need ladders." And so people started calling me the freak. Because I was so tall, and they would always send me up on the ladders for the unsafe portions of the painting that no one else could reach. And so that's actually part of my reason for calling it the freak factor, but we'll get into a little more of that later. So I was always in trouble at school. Karen started talking a little bit about this in her case. I was always in trouble at school for three things. I couldn't sit still, be quiet, or do what I was told. That meant that teachers didn't like me very much. They called me obnoxious, rebellious, inappropriate, immature, told me I had no self-discipline and no self-control. And that if I didn't fix those things, I was going to end up homeless and living in a van down by the river. Now, one of the things I normally don't share, because I rarely talk to Christian audiences, is that I always went to Christian schools. And I didn't go to middle of the road Christian schools. I went to hardcore, very conservative, independent, fundamental Baptist Christian schools, oftentimes that met in the basement of the church. And so they didn't just call you obnoxious and rebellious and inappropriate. They accused you directly of being a fundamentally bad person and having problems in your soul, if that makes sense, right? You weren't just misbehaving, you were challenging God and God's authority, and you were fighting against God's purpose for your life, or at least God's rules that he had put in place with the adults in your life. And so that's a part that I don't normally tell, but I think that's one of the things we do to further damage people. It's one thing to even be told you have ADHD and you need some medication. I think that can be damaging enough to tell someone they should be medicated because they have a high level of activity. But it's even farther when you sort of attack their spiritual value or their spiritual standing because they can't sit still in the classroom. And so I got sent to the principal's office. The teachers would always give up on me. And I remember in third grade, I was 8 years old. To give you a sense of how conservative the church was, it was Pilgrim Baptist Christian School. We were taking it all the way back to the beginning. And so I got sent to the principal's office in the basement of the church. I think he was the pastor. He sat me down in his lap, which seems questionable now looking back on it. Yes. And he told me a story about three kinds of bad people. And again, we're dealing with a Christian audience here. And so I don't normally share this, but it was the story of scoffers, mockers, and fools, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that I still remember this at 46 when it was told to me when I was 8 shows that it was a pivotal moment. And basically the basic version of that is there's bad people, really bad people, and people who are too far gone, right? It's a Bible story that says some people are, misguided, but they can be turned around. Other people are pretty tough cases, but they might make it. And then there's other people that you just give up on and you don't spend your time on. And he told me at age 8 that I was a really bad kid on the verge of being too far gone if I couldn't learn to sit still, be quiet, and do what I was told. Now, I want to be really clear about something here. I think he had the right intentions. I think he was a good person. I think he was a godly person. And I think he legitimately cared about me. And he was trying to help me in the same way that he'd been taught to help everyone, that he was teaching me what his parents and his teachers and his employers had taught him, and he was passing those lessons on to me. And the main lesson was that you have to, if you want to help people get better, you need to find their weaknesses and you need to fix them. In his mind, my inability to sit still, be quiet, and do what I was told was a fundamental flaw. It was a fatal flaw. And if I couldn't get that under control, I was never going to be successful. And I do believe that he wanted me to succeed, but his intentions were damaged by his intentions didn't match his framework. He had the right intentions, but he had the wrong framework. But again, it was the same framework that basically everyone has. Now, I'm not the only one who had trouble in school. Ken Robinson, if you haven't watched his TED video, you should. Sir Ken Robinson says, many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized, right? Now, look at that process, right? And by the way, this doesn't just happen at school. It happens at home. My parents at home called me motor mouth. And it was a constant reminder of my inability to be quiet. And in their mind, again, they were teaching me what their parents and their teachers and their employers had taught them. They had the right intentions, but they had the wrong framework. At home, I was constantly reminded there was something wrong with me and that I needed to fix that if I was going to be successful. This happens at work. Sometimes we bring our best to work, and the feedback we get from the people around us or the people above us is that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. People see our weaknesses and not our strengths. So watch how this happens. Many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not. I mean, even just listen to Karen's story from earlier. She's like, why can't I get to that level? And now she has a doctorate. There's no other level, right? But at that time, the message to her was, you're not enough. You don't have what it takes. We can predict your future, And our prediction is that you're not going to make it. And the problem with making those kind of predictions is they're self-fulfilling prophecies sometimes. Yeah. You tell a kid enough times that they're not going to make it, and they start to believe you because they figure you must know. I did. I figured my parents must know. I wasn't one of those kids who was like, I'm going to show you, I'm going to make it, and you're all going to be sorry. I was like, oh, you're an adult. And all the adults were saying the same thing. You must know, you have more experience, and you're all telling me that you're wise and you have God's, wisdom flowing through you. You must have this figured out. I guess I'm going to be a failure. That's disappointing, but I guess you win some and you lose some, right? Yeah. So many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued, was actually stigmatized. Now watch that process. The thing they were good at, their strength, wasn't valued. It was either ignored or it was denied, or it was actually stigmatized. We told them that the best thing about them was the worst thing about them. We told them that their biggest strength was actually a weakness. And I realized that's what happened to me, because when I'm not on lockdown for COVID-19, I'm a professional speaker. I get paid to stand up, not to sit down. I get paid to talk, not to be quiet. And I get paid to run my own business, not to do what other people tell me to do. Every one of my weaknesses was a weakness. I'm not here telling you tonight people don't have weaknesses. That's absolutely not true. People do have weaknesses. But every one of those weaknesses was also a strength, and no one saw that. My parents didn't see it. My teachers didn't see it. My employers didn't see it. So I didn't see it. And it wasn't until I accidentally stumbled across some of these truths and actually sort of had things happen to me that caused me to simply ask the question one day, I wonder if some of my weaknesses are strengths. I wonder if my biggest weakness is a strength. And when I realized that it was, I started pursuing directions that had been previously blocked off to me because everybody said, you shouldn't do that. That's the absolute worst thing you need. You need to be fixing those parts of you. You don't need to be moving farther in that direction. You need to be moving back away from those kinds of things. So I went from being afraid to be up front to trying to get up front. I went from trying to sit still to trying to be active. I went from trying to do what I was told to looking for opportunities to be in charge and to be in control of things. And I don't even really want to be in control of other people. I'm just happy to be in control of myself. That's why I love running my own business. I have things that I want to accomplish, which is why I don't want to do whatever you want me to do. I'm not a bad person. I just have my own goals, so I don't want to sign up for your goals. It doesn't make me rebellious. It just makes me a person with initiative and motivation and drive. So I learned that every one of my weaknesses is a strength, but that doesn't mean anything to you. That doesn't matter to you because you're not me. And so then I started wondering, I wonder if this is true for other people. I wonder if other people have weaknesses that are strengths. And when I asked that question, the immediate answer was yes. And I started finding amazing examples. And that's what I want to share with you today. And so Parker Palmer says we're led to truth by our weaknesses as well as our strengths. I want to show you today how our weaknesses can lead us to not just our strengths, but the strengths of other people. If you're in the business of getting better, and if you're in the business of helping other people get better, there's a different way to go about it, different than what we've been taught by our parents, our teachers, and our employers. And we're led to truth by our weaknesses as well as our strengths. So what I want to show you is that every weakness has a corresponding strength. And that when we see that, we can find the truth. The truth about Karen was she could earn a doctorate, but people didn't see that truth at a young age, right? They saw deficits. They didn't see those other characteristics because those characteristics in their mind weren't as valuable as the things they'd been taught to look for. So what I want to show you is how we can actually use our ability to see weaknesses in others to lead us to their strengths. And that sounds ridiculous. And some of you might even be questioning this whole idea right now. So we're going to practice right now, and you can participate in the chat as we do this. So I'm going to tell you a story about my youngest daughter's weaknesses. I'm only going to talk about negative things about her. In fact, some of you are going to question my value as a father when I'm done telling the stories. And as I tell you these stories, because we're doing the chat, you don't have to wait till the end. As I'm telling you the story, I want you to type into the chat any strengths you hear, as I talk about her weaknesses. So, and what I want you to do also is think about yourself, right? If you have kids, if you have a difficult kid, if you have a kid that's so difficult, if you would have had them first, you wouldn't have had more, if you know what I mean, right? And that's what it is with Sophia. She's our third, and we only have 3. And there's a reason for that, right? We had her, and then we're like, we're not good at this anymore. our quality level is slipping. It's not responsible for us to keep producing humans at this level. We should shut down the factory now because we're not producing the same quality of humans that we produced the first 2 times. And Sophia's difficult. The way that you know that Sophia's difficult is she looked my wife and I in the eye when she was 4 years old, and she said, "I hate you, and I wish I had another family." Right? That's some difficult feedback to get from a 4-year-old. I thought I was up for like, a raise, maybe a promotion. And instead I got, "I hate you and I wish I had another family." I didn't know how to respond to that. I said, "Well, I guess we appreciate you being open with your feelings and sharing how you feel with us. Because, we've been feeling the same way about you." And we didn't know that we could talk about this out loud, right? We didn't know we could have this conversation. We're actually looking for another family for you. And we're hoping to get it done before the trade deadline, right? So she's difficult. And one of the things that makes her difficult is she's a liar. Now, we all lie. So what makes someone a liar? A liar is someone who lies even when it's not advantageous. They lie in situations where it has no practical value. And so I'm going to tell you my favorite lie that she ever told. And again, remember, listen for the strengths as I tell this story. So she was going to kindergarten. First day of kindergarten, teacher says, "Bring a snack and a lunch." And so she brings this bottle of water and some Ritz crackers in a Ziploc bag. And snack time rolls around, and she gets out her snack, but she notices some kids don't have a snack. And the teacher notices some kids don't have a snack. And instead of punishing the children for not bringing a snack, as they were clearly instructed to do, and instead of making them go without a snack, the teacher she's ready, and she has cookies and juice, and she gives the cookies and juice to the kids who didn't have a snack. Now, I don't know if you remember what it's like to be in kindergarten, but my daughter was not pleased by this. She was like, "This is some bull crap right here. I'm over here with crackers and water, basically prison rations. And these delinquents over here who didn't follow instructions are getting cookies and juice. I want cookies and juice." So she raises her hand, first day of school. Teacher calls on her. She says, "Sophia, what can I do for you?" She goes, "I forgot to tell you earlier, I'm actually allergic to water." She sold all her credibility one of school for cookies and juice. It's like the story of Jacob and Esau, right? You sell your birthright for some porridge, right? She sold all her credibility on day 1 of school for cookies and juice. So Sophia's difficult, and Sophia's a liar. And ironically, as somebody already posted there, she's honest in some ways, right? She'll tell you what she thinks, but she's also dishonest. I like that. We got strategic. We've got transparent. What are some other strengths that people think of when they hear that story? What are some strengths that Sophia has, even though all I told you was weaknesses?
Hey.
She wants fairness and consistency. She absolutely, Karen knows my daughter. She wants the ability to control her environment. Yeah, and she's got courage, right? It's the first day of kindergarten, and she's like, ooh, talk to me, give me what I want. Right? And that's definitely true. She was so little when we sent her to kindergarten, her body mass index at her physical at the doctor was 0. Her body mass index was 0. They're like, "Your daughter does not exist in physical space." Right? And so she didn't get that much bigger, and she's in 7th grade last year. And that puts her in the we send her to a Christian school as well. And she's in the hallway with high schoolers as a 7th grader. And she was, 5'2", but weighed about, 74 pounds or whatever, And I said, "How did it go first day of school?" And she goes, "Well, some of those high school boys were in my way in the hallway. So I found I had to throw some elbows, to get where I needed to go." Right. Versus what would some other kids do? They'd be like, "Yeah, I was late to class because there were so many people." And in her mind, she's 6'5", 280, right? She's an offensive lineman. So she definitely has that courage. One of her friends was being bullied. And the kid literally told her friend that if she told on him, he'd kill her. And again, in today's world with school shootings and things like that, that might sound exaggerated, but to a kid, that's tremendously scary. Mm-hmm. And so my daughter's friends with that girl, and she said, "That's ridiculous. We're going to the principal right now." And she grabbed the girl's hand and took her to the principal's office and told him what was going on, right? She stood up for that girl. And so notice what happened, right? I only gave you negative feedback. I only gave you negative information, and look at all the different strengths, not just strengths, but all the different strengths that people were able to suggest. One of the things that people say sometimes is creative. And that's one of her strongest qualities. She's tremendously imaginative. That's what we call creative thinking. And sometimes she tries to sell her imagination as reality, and we call that dishonesty. But the key thing is that my daughter isn't just a sociopath, right? She's not fundamentally immoral. She has a weakness that's also a strength. And what I want you to think about is, how does that probably affect my relationship with my daughter, who's now 13, that I see that hiding inside this strong-willed, dishonest person are a lot of really big strengths, right? She's persistent. She's not going to let things go. She's courageous. She's going to stand up for what she believes in. She's not afraid to tell you what she's thinking and what she's feeling, even if it hurts your feelings. She's got tremendous strengths and tremendous weaknesses, but the danger is, in a traditional perspective, all I would see would be what? Would see those weaknesses. And especially in a Christian environment, dishonesty, oh my goodness, that's lack of integrity. And that's sin. And so, oh my gosh, I got a bad one the third time around. How come I didn't get a good Christian the third time around? So think about how that changes my interactions with her. Again, I'm not failing to acknowledge there's weakness and negativity there, but I'm seeing the strength connected to that weakness. And here's what's crucial for our purposes today. You were able to see strength when all I gave you was weakness. And that's a skill that we can develop. It's not hard to do. It's just knowing that it's possible, that it's true. And in your life from now on, every time you encounter somebody and you see that weakness, you can simply ask yourself, I wonder what the corresponding strength is. I wonder what the upside is. And when you ask that question, you'll almost always see it. This is why getting people a job when they have a disability is so difficult. Because when someone has a visible disability and an employer sees them, the question is, okay, if I can see weakness, I wonder what else is wrong with them. That's the natural response to any kind of weakness. If I can see visible weakness, there's got to be even more under the surface. If I can see visible disability, there's got to be even more under the surface. And so what I'm showing you is that not only is that not correct, the real response is, I can see a negative. I wonder what the corresponding strength is. I can see a weakness. I wonder what the upside, I wonder what the advantage is. So my thesis for today is really simple. It's that what makes us weird also makes us wonderful, and what makes us weak also makes us strong. And by the way, that's another area in which the Christian world sometimes really, I think, fails our children, our students, and each other, because we value conformity to God's word so much that we really start to stretch what God's word said and what it means. And what we really do is value just conformity. And when somebody won't conform to our view of what's right, we want to make them a bad Christian. And so we really don't value weirdness to the extent that I think Jesus was super weird. John the Baptist was super weird. The disciples were super weird in their world. And so that's an area we can do better as Christians. Anyway, what makes us weird also makes us wonderful. What makes us weak also makes us strong. So one of the steps in this process is acceptance, to see that weaknesses are strengths in disguise, to see that every characteristic is a strength and a weakness at the same time. And a good way to think about this is like side effects. Every medicine has side effects. There's no such thing as a medicine without side effects. And if you tell me, Dave, I'm not going to take any medicines until they get rid of the side effects, you literally can't take any medicine. Tylenol has side effects. Ibuprofen has side effects. If you can't accept the side effects, you can't get the benefits that a medicine provides. And I think this is a great analogy, because I think every person has side effects. There's no such thing as a person without side effects, and we can't get the benefits that somebody provides, this world or our relationship, if we're not willing to accept the side effects. Peter Drucker said it this way. He said, strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys. Strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys. And this is another big one that's difficult in Christianity, because weaknesses sound a lot like sins and sound a lot like moral failings and a lot like a lack of integrity. And we can't have people with those kinds of problems in leadership or et cetera. And so we start to rule people out really fast. And as I was explaining earlier, I think that net gets too wide too early, but we don't have time to get into that today. So anyway, strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys. And so I call this acceptance because it's hard to accept. So let's watch what happens when we don't accept it. When we don't accept that strengths and weaknesses are connected and you can't have one without the other. So Walmart has one big strength, low prices. Walmart has a bunch of weaknesses. It's Friday night, so I'll just give you 3. Poor service, poor quality, poor design. Now let's fix Walmart. Let's just fix one weakness and watch what happens. Let's fix service. Let's hire more people. Let's train them better. Let's treat them better. Let's give them better benefits. Let's pay them better. What just happened to the costs at Walmart? They went up. What just happened to the prices at Walmart? They went up. What just happened to the only strength, the singular strength that the organization has? It just went down. You broke Walmart when you were trying to fix them. Walmart isn't unaware of how to improve service. They are deliberately not improving their service because it's not part of their strategy, because it doesn't serve the strength that they are selling to people who value the lowest possible prices and really don't value service at all. The opposite is Target. We got some ladies here. We know the ladies call it Target, right? Because they have better service, better quality, better design. So then why doesn't everybody shop at Target? Well, the prices are a little bit higher. That's their weakness. They're strong everywhere that's Walmart's weak, but they're weak in the one big area that Walmart's strong. Well, let's fix them. Let's lower the prices at Target so they can compete with Walmart. But what are we gonna have to do? We're gonna have to sacrifice service, quality, and design and stop being Target and go back to being Target. Now, what we've been taught in business and in life is no, you just gotta find the balance, the right amount, the perfect amount of both, the best of both worlds. You just have to be balanced and well-rounded. Well, there's a company that tried that, and they're called Kmart. Kmart was the low price leader. They had the distribution, the location, the reputations. They were the savings place. They had the blue light special. And then Walmart came to town, and all they had to do was lower their prices a little bit for a little while, and nobody would have ever heard of Walmart. But instead, Kmart hired Martha Stewart, and they tried to be a little bit of Target, a little bit of Walmart, and they ended up bankrupt. Then they came out of bankruptcy, and they bought Sears, inexplicably. Neither company changed their strategies, and now both of the companies are going bankrupt again. And that's why I do this presentation, because I'm worried that we're turning our children, we're turning our spouses and our partners, we're turning our organizations, we're turning ourselves, and we're oftentimes turning our employees and our people into Kmarts. In our effort to make them better, and we have the right intentions, we use the wrong framework, and we try to fix the weakness thinking it'll make them better, and it actually damages their corresponding strengths. It makes them average, invisible, and mediocre, just like Kmart. It doesn't matter if you like Target or you like Walmart or you like neither one of them. They're both fantastically successful because they deliberately have certain weaknesses in order to have the corresponding strength. What makes us weird also makes us wonderful. What makes us weak also makes us strong. We need to accept that truth, accept that reality. The next part, though, is appreciation. To see that we succeed because of our weaknesses, not in spite of them. It's not enough to accept that this is like an unfortunate reality. We want to see the upside and appreciate it and feel that value. So George Eliot said, every limit is a beginning as well as an ending. And by the way, this is another important point to make. Most of our participants tonight are female. I live with 3 daughters and 1 wife. So my life is all women all the time. George Eliot was not George. George Eliot was a female who lived in a world that saw being female as a weakness, right? An unfixable, irreparable weakness. And the only way to get published in her world was to pretend you were a man, because only men had good ideas and only men said things that made sense. And so if you don't believe that the world does this to people, sees strengths as weaknesses, just remember that for most of human history, we saw simply the act of being a female as a weakness and did not see any of the upside, any of the value in people who were women. So she said, every limit is a beginning as well as an ending. And I want to show you the beginnings that come with the limits that we have. Let's just pick one. Let's pick dyslexia. You struggle to read and struggle to write, so you're going to struggle in school. And we've all been taught that you struggle in school, you're going to struggle in life. And that's why they were surprised when they were studying millionaires in the United Kingdom and discovered that 50% of the millionaires in their study had dyslexia, even though only 10% of people in the general population have dyslexia. They were studying entrepreneurs in the United States and discovered that 35% of the entrepreneurs had dyslexia, even though only 10% of people in the general population have dyslexia. Ingvar Kamprad was the billionaire founder of IKEA. He had dyslexia. Richard Branson's the billionaire founder of the Virgin series of companies. He has dyslexia. And what some of you were thinking, and because this is what we've been taught, is, yeah, Dave, he overcame his dyslexia. He got the tutoring and assistance he needed to overcome that disability, to fight through that challenge. That's what's so inspiring about that story. No. They asked Richard Branson, how has dyslexia affected your success? And he said, strangely, I think my dyslexia has helped. Strangely, surprisingly, counterintuitively, against what we've been taught to believe, my dyslexia has helped. What scientists are starting to realize is people with dyslexia don't have broken brains, they have different brains. And the same brain that caused them to struggle in school oftentimes causes them to succeed in life at a higher level than most of the rest of us ever will. This guy's name is Paul Orfalea. He got kicked out of 4 different schools during his school career. And then he wouldn't just get fired from the jobs that he got, he'd get fired on the first day. So he got a job with his dad thinking that might be better. And then he got fired by his own father.
Oh my goodness.
So he had no other hope other than to start his own business or be homeless and jobless. So he started his own business. He called it Kinko's because he had long curly hair and his friend called him Kinko. And then he sold Kinko's to FedEx for $2.4 billion. And he said this, he said, I think everyone should have dyslexia. If you wonder what appreciation looks like, that's what it looks like. Wishing other people had your disability, right? If this is wrong with me and my life is this good, I wish you had something wrong with you that was the same. They've actually asked him the exact question, if we could give you a pill that would cure dyslexia, would you take it? And he said, absolutely not. Absolutely not, because when you fixed my weakness, you destroy my strength. When you took away the disadvantage, you would damage and take away the advantage. He understands intuitively that you can't have one without the other. The title of his book includes the terms, How a Hyperactive Dyslexic Accomplished So Much, right? He puts both of those terms in. In other words, don't you wish you were hyperactive? Don't you wish you were so dyslexic? There's a guy named Peter Shankman who wrote a book called Faster Than Normal about having ADHD. And notice that title, Faster Than Normal. It's not like, oh, I'm sorry, I've got ADHD. Maybe someday I can fix it. No. What's he saying? Faster than normal. He's saying, don't you wish you had ADHD? Don't you wish you were as awesome as me? How disappointing must it be for you to not be able to move your focus as quickly and as much as I do? That's appreciation. When you value, and now let's think about this from a Christian perspective for a second. God made you that way. God made you that way. He had a reason for making you that way. And so even just for no other reason, shouldn't we be in the business of appreciating how God's made it? How silly is it for me to be upset that I'm 6'6" when I believe that God made me that way? How wrong is it for me to be upset about having dyslexia or ADHD if God made me that way? And so these people have realized there's strength and weakness, and that there's value in something that other people don't value, but we should even be able to take it farther with our appreciation as Christians and see what makes us weird also makes us wonderful because God made us weird. What makes us weak also makes us strong because God gave us those particular weaknesses because he also wanted to give us those particular strengths, and us wishing we were someone else or had the strengths of someone else or had the life of someone else is us throwing away the life that God is trying to give us and that the life that God prepared us for. Amen. So the next step is alignment, to stop trying to fit in and to start trying to find the right fit. So some of you might be thinking, hey, Dave, this is ridiculous. My boss doesn't want, my boss isn't going to appreciate my weaknesses. My boss doesn't want more of what's wrong with me. My boss doesn't see the peaks where everyone else sees valleys. My spouse doesn't want this. My friends don't want this, right? And so we need to talk a little bit about the situational nature of the qualities that we have. We need to stop trying to fit in and start trying to find the right fit. Because let's take work. If you say my boss or my company needs certain things from me, then maybe that's not the right company for you. Maybe that's not the right role for you. When I was in school, the same behaviors that were seen as negative are now seen as positive when I'm a professional speaker. Nobody ever leaves one of my speeches and goes, oh my gosh, the guy talked the whole time. That's the job, right? That's the job. And even here, I'm sitting in a chair and I'm getting exercise. I'm burning more calories than the average person. When I'm on stage, I'm getting laps done. You know, I'm walking miles back and forth on that stage. I bring that energy when I do Ironman triathlons and I do ultra marathons. Just during this lockdown, I've done my first 100-mile race. I did it completely on my own because the race got canceled. My first 100-mile running race. And then I did another one with some friends and we raised $5,000 for Make-A-Wish. And then a month later, I ran 7 marathons in 7 days, just again, on my own. They're not organized races. And then I ran another 16.6 miles to round it off to an even 200 because that seemed like a fun number, right? When I do that, people say things like, that's amazing, that's inspiring, that challenges me to be better, that's impressive. I get praised and rewarded for being very, very, very active as an adult. And when I was a child, they called it hyperactive, they called it ADHD, they pathologized it, they offered me medicine. The Christians told me I was a bad person and that there was something wrong in my soul. And now some of those same people, that thing I got criticized and punished for my whole life, sometimes some of those same people that I still have relationships say, oh, wow, Dave, that's amazing that you do those ultra marathons and those Ironmans. I'm the same person doing exactly the same thing, but I'm doing it in a different situation. And even sometimes the same people see it differently. I'm being praised and rewarded for the same things I used to be criticized and punished for. I bought my parents a house with the money that I make as a professional speaker, and they're the ones that called me motor mouth for my whole life. And that's really crucial, by the way, because I'm not in therapy because of my parents. I don't hate my parents. I'm not somewhere talking about what was wrong with my parents, because remember what I said. My parents had the right intentions, but they had the wrong framework. And they had the wrong framework because they were taught it by their pastors and they were taught it by their teachers and they were taught it by their employers. They were trying to help me. They just didn't have the right tools. So I didn't just not in therapy. I bought them a house. If you paid attention to that part of the story, I love them so much. I'm trying to help them, even though for a long time, they couldn't identify my strengths. They're just as surprised as the rest of us. They don't call me motor mouth anymore, do they? Right? They're like, we always knew Dave was, of all our 4 kids, Dave was the one who was going to make it. You know, we just always knew there was something special there, right? They forget about all the beatings, right? So the situation really matters. So we have to stop trying to fit in and start trying to find the right fit. And so here's an example of a bunch of things because we're doing a shorter presentation here. This guy's name is Matthias Schlitt. And the first thing you'll notice about him is his right arm is huge. His right arm is 18 inches around, and that's not normal. He's born with a genetic abnormality called KTS, which makes one of your 4 limbs, it can be either a leg or an arm, it makes one of your 4 limbs gigantic in comparison to the rest of them. His left arm, as you can see, is only 6 inches around, and it even has sweatbands on it to make it look a little bit bigger. So he's born with a genetic abnormality called KTS. He can't fix it. So what does he do? Well, he becomes a professional arm wrestler. In arm wrestling, the only thing that you use is your right arm. And isn't it fantastic to have a gigantic one right out of the gate? So alignment, he finds the right fit and he goes from being a weirdo to being amazing. People go from making fun of him to being afraid of him because he found the right fit. A situation in which his genetic abnormality that can't be cured is a strength instead of a weakness. But let's keep going. He found alignment, which also gives him the opportunity for amplification. He's turning up the volume on something that otherwise people would want to get him to turn the volume down on, right? He's a big weirdo walking around with this giant right arm. Why wouldn't you'd want it in normal life to deteriorate a little bit to make it thinner. And then you might even try to bulk up the rest of your body to try to make it match somehow so it wasn't as noticeable. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what he's doing. He's exercising that right arm for all he's worth because he wants to make it even bigger and stronger than it already was. He wants to make his abnormality even more abnormal. He wants to make his genetic weakness even more noticeable because it's a huge opportunity when he's found the right fit. As an endurance athlete, my hyperactivity is a huge advantage. As a professional speaker, my energy level and desire to speak is a huge advantage. As an entrepreneur, My desire to and natural instinct to take control of my life is a huge advantage. All those weaknesses become strengths only when it's in the right situation. He found the perfect situation for who he is, to the point that people want more instead of less of what used to be wrong with him. But then there's one more piece: alignment, amplification, but then also avoidance. Because look at that left arm again. That arm could be bigger, right? He could make that arm bigger. He could exercise that arm and make it bigger. He could drink more protein shakes and make it bigger. The rest of his body is incredibly thin as well. Nothing matches that right arm. So why doesn't he, we're not talking abstractly now, why doesn't he fix actual physical weakness? And here's why. Because you arm wrestle by weight class. You stand your entire body on the scale, and then you arm wrestle against people who weigh the same total amount as you. Now you do that in wrestling, but then you bring your whole body into the ring. You do that in UFC, but you bring your whole body into the cage. You do that in boxing, but you bring your whole body into the ring with you. But in arm wrestling, you weigh your entire body, and then you only get to use your right arm. What he's learned is that amplification is important, alignment's important, but avoidance is also important. He deliberately doesn't try to fix his weakness. He doesn't try to make the rest of his body stronger and more normal, because it would count against him on the scale, which would make the person he's arm wrestling against bigger and harder to beat. It would, one of the things we say about weakness fixing is, what's it going to hurt to get a little better at it, right? What's it going to hurt? That's what it would hurt. When you fix a weakness, it damages the corresponding strength. And in this situation, every pound he puts on makes him wrestle against somebody who's even bigger. By deliberately keeping the rest of his body thin and maximizing the size of his right arm, he's creating a bigger and bigger and bigger advantage against other people in the specific situation that he's chosen to be successful in. And that's crucial. We're all arm wrestling by weight class. A Christian college is wrestling by weight class. You as an employee are wrestling by weight class. Every business, every relation, we're all arm wrestling by weight class. And here's what that means. It means some things matter and a lot of things don't. And the mistake we make in life is thinking that everything matters, or at least probably kind of most of the things matter. And they absolutely do not. In fact, Judson did this at one point. When Judson added the architecture program, they made a big bet that some things would matter more than other things, and you didn't have to be good at all the things in order to be successful, that people would come because you were good at one thing, even if all the other things weren't perfect. And now, I'll be honest with you, and I can say this because I don't work there, one of my things that I'm afraid of with the current approach to Judson of let's get a football team, let's do this, people have told us that they want a more normal, traditional experience where they have this and this and this and this. Everybody does. If you ask me, do I want a Mercedes that costs $10,000 but is perfect and luxurious and gets really good gas mileage and is also a hybrid but can run on gas but is also electric but is also basically free and is also reliable? I want all those things, but I can't have those things. I have to either pay more to get a Mercedes, or I have to pay less to get a Honda, or I have to pay even less and get a Hyundai, and then I'm sacrificing some reliability, but I'm getting that cheaper price. There's trade-offs that we have to make in this world. And when we won't make those trade-offs, we become average, we become invisible, we become mediocre. I think it's going to be really hard to get enough people to come to Judson because there's a football team, when a lot of people, again, that's their basic expectation. And if they want a football team, that's great, but then Judson isn't the place for you. And so I think, whereas my daughter would never consider Judson because they don't have gymnastics, but very few Christian colleges have gymnastics. If you add gymnastics, now you're actually creating something where people are coming for that because it's something that other Christian colleges don't have. But I'm losing the focus here for a second. All right, so I'm panicking a little bit. I did the presentation to the board. They heard it, and they said they liked it, but it doesn't seem like it's working. Anyway. So let's go with another example of finding the right fit. Sometimes we can't find the right fit. We have to create the right fit. So there's a guy named Thorkild Sohn in Denmark, and he had a son with autism. And two of the things that his son was in therapy for with autism, and that anybody in autism, they try to give him therapy for because it's weird and it's abnormal, is they focus too much and they like to do the same thing over and over again. More than is normal, which means it's bad. So his son hyperfocuses, does the same thing over and over again because that's what people with autism do. He goes to work and he notices that when they do software testing, they need people who can hyperfocus and do the same thing over and over again. So he starts a business called SPECIALISTERNE. It means the specialists in Danish. And they only hire people with autism because people with autism are better at software testing because they can hyperfocus and do the same thing over and over again. He didn't find the right situation for his son. He created the right situation for his son. And in the right situation, the weakness becomes a strength. The disadvantage becomes an advantage. The crucial thing is here about alignment is we don't have to change who we are. We need to change where we are. We don't need to change the person. We need to change the place. Because situations can either put the spotlight on the best things about us or can put the spotlight on the worst things about us, but it's not us that's changing, it's the situation.
Right.
And when we want to help people get better, and when we want to get better, we need to ask ourselves about the match, about the connection between the person and the place. Now, you might have felt like I was critical of Judson, so I'll tell you something very positive about Judson. I met Elliot Anderson at Judson College, and I was in Wilson dorm when I was a sophomore, and he said, Dave, are you going to apply to be a resident assistant? And I said, no, because I am the reason you have resident assistants, right? That was my identity at that point. That's what I'd been told for my entire life. He said, no, Dave, when I look at you, the very qualities that other people, he didn't say these words, but this is what he said. He said, when I see you, I see myself when I was your age, and I see leadership where everybody else sees a troublemaker. In other words, I see weakness where everybody else sees strengths. And Elliot was the first person who saw strength in me where everyone else saw weakness, which means it was the first time I ever saw strength where everyone else saw weakness. And that was the beginning. And then if you're going to be a resident assistant at Judson College, they give you, at least back in the day, they give you some leadership books to read over the summer. And that was the beginning of my leadership journey. And now some of you have read my book, The 4 Factors of Effective Leadership, that goes all the way back to somebody saying, no, 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 Dave, you don't need to be a prisoner. You could be the warden, right? I see, it's like Karen said, people told me, or I believed, oh, you're not at that level. And he said, no, 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 no. He was the first person who was able to see past the surface, right? Man looks on the outward appearance, the Lord looks at the heart, right? But you don't always know what the Lord's seeing. And sometimes you need a man or a woman to see past that, right? And that's one of our jobs as Christians, is to look past the outward appearance. I mean, think back to the story of David and Goliath. David didn't beat Goliath with a bigger sword, with a bigger helmet. God didn't strike Goliath with lightning. God saw a bunch of strengths: small size, unusual approach, quickness, surprise, right? He saw strength where everyone else saw weakness. He saw an opportunity for a victory where everyone else saw certain defeat. But God didn't magically beat Goliath. He beat him with what David had, with who David was. Everybody else just underestimated who David was because they only saw weakness, and God saw strength that no one else could see. Right? And that's what Thorkel's son did. But he didn't just see it. He had to create the situation where his son could succeed. And now 50 other people with autism have succeeded, to the point that the global software giant SAP searches out hundreds of people with disability, with autism every single year to do software testing for them. So what should you stop doing, right? What should you allow other people to stop doing? What should we allow students to stop doing? What should our organizations sometimes stop doing so that we can be successful? So let's wrap it up with an example. This is the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's been leaning since 1173, 847 years it's been leaning, right? But in the 1930s, Mussolini decided this was a national embarrassment. And he ordered his government engineers to straighten it up. And they tried and they failed. And that was a really lucky thing for the city of Pisa, wasn't it? Because millions of people have traveled millions of miles and spent millions of dollars to see a tower that leans. They don't go even though it leans, they go because it leans. As Karen said at the beginning, I've spoken on every continent. That's almost true. I've spoken on every inhabited continent. I've never spoken on Antarctica. They don't have a lot of conferences down there. The Penguins aren't bringing in a lot of leadership speakers. But I've traveled the world enough to know that the Leaning Tower of Pisa is the universal sign for an Italian restaurant. It doesn't matter if you're in the Middle East. It doesn't matter if you're in Asia. It doesn't matter if you're in Africa. When you see a painted Leaning Tower of Pisa on the side of a building, they serve spaghetti inside, right? It's not just kind of a symbol of the country. He saw it as a national embarrassment when in fact it's something that makes Italy very interesting and very attractive to a lot of people. And that's what they finally figured out. The people who run the tower now say because of its inclination, the tower has become the object of very special attention. Because of its inclination, the tower has become the object of very special attention. Not even though, nobody goes to see it even though it leans. People go to see it because it leans, and that's what I'm telling you all tonight. It's because of your inclination, and the inclination that God, by the way, gave you. It's because of your inclination, because of your kids' inclination, because of your students' inclination, because of your organization's inclination, that your life, your work, your organization becomes the object of very special attention. So what are they doing now at the tower? They're saying it's important to keep the current tilt due to the vital role this element played in promoting the tourism industry of Pisa. And especially in Christianity, but in general, as adults and as professionals, and as teachers, we can oftentimes see our job as to straighten people up and straighten people out. Show them how to do it the right way, which is usually our way, instead of preserving the inclination that God gave them, preserving the tilt that they have, due to the vital role this element played in promoting the tourism industry of Pisa. The vital role. People don't go even though it leans, they go because it leans. Now, I want to make a quick comment here because I was struck by this when Karen started talking at the beginning, that are especially relevant to the times we live in right now. I've been doing this Freak Factor presentation for years, and I believe in it, and I believe it passionately, and I believe it's true, and I believe it's valuable. But here's one of the things I've learned. When you're white and when you're a man, you have a higher percentage chance of people seeing your weaknesses as strengths. People are more likely to see an assertive white man as having leadership potential. You have an assertive female, regardless of color. What does Sheryl Sandberg say? Oh, you're bossy, right? You're bossy. Maybe you need to calm down. We use some pretty negative language, actually, for women that are too assertive, accusing them of being aggressive and calling them nasty names that we won't say on this, right? Instead of saying, wow, there's a woman who has potential to lead others and lead our organization. There's a woman who needs to calm down. There's a woman who needs to get under control. There's a woman who needs to relax. And then we maybe even start talking about female reproductive cycles, right? We don't take some people seriously, and we love to focus on their weaknesses instead of their strengths. And now let's add race to it. Because now Karen's not just a little girl, she's a little black girl, and people have already been trained to go, well, little black girls don't have the same potential as little white girls, and they certainly don't have the same potential as white boys do. It's easier to write some people off than others. So here's one of the things I'm starting to realize. We are more likely to see weaknesses and fail to see the strengths of people who are minorities, either because they're female, which is a ridiculous term because there's more women than men, but are minorities socially because they're women, or because of their ethnic background, because they're Hispanic, because they're black, whatever it happens to be. And so that's one layer that I think needs to be seen on top of this. It took a long time for anybody to see my weaknesses as strengths, but when somebody did, I at least lived in a world that once I knew what my strengths were, I could execute them in the real world, and it stopped being a negative and it started being almost exclusively a positive. Meanwhile, there's somebody else who's following the exact same path, and they can't make any progress because the world can't believe that that person has anything worth adding. And so they can't possibly make that switch between weakness and strength. They just don't see it. It's not possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really important in all this, because when I would hear, oh, you know, racial inequality and white privilege and things like that, what I used to think is, man, I grew up in a trailer park. I thought I delivered newspapers when I was 12 years old. I thought I worked 7 jobs at Judson to pay for school, and I still had to borrow every dollar I could get my hands on. I didn't have it easy, and I didn't. But when I made that effort, I got the results. Meanwhile, there's millions of other people who, through no fault of their own, are giving maybe even sometimes 5 times the effort and not getting the results, because we live in a world that says, if you're black, there's certain things you can't do. If you're a girl, there's certain things you can't do. If you're black and a girl, there's certain things you definitely can't do, or there's just ways that I refuse to see you. And I'm trained to see any of those strengths that you exhibit as weaknesses, right? Think about young black men. Again, go assertive. Now that's aggressive. It's not leadership opportunities. That person now becomes dangerous, and our job is to keep those people under control. And so this is something that I'm really passionate about. I don't spend a lot of time on it because I'm a white, straight Christian man, and there's plenty of other people doing great work on that. But that's how that relates to what I talk about, and it makes me sad, and it's something that I'm passionate about. And it's one of the reasons I'm so excited that I get to speak to teachers and I get to speak to the students directly, because I'm trying to create a world in which people see that their weaknesses are strengths, even when sometimes they live in a world where no one else wants to acknowledge that reality. All right, sorry, I'm starting to preach a little bit here. I grew up in church, I can't help it. All right, so let's wrap it up. This is my mission in life, which started when I was a teenager, but definitely grew at Judson. E.E. Cummings said, "We do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside of us something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch." And that's what I try to do. I try to show people that deep inside of them something is valuable, and this is crucial. Maybe the thing that they've been told their whole life by their parents, teachers, and employers, the people around them, is the most worthless thing about them. That it's worth listening to, that it's worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. And I think our job as educators, I think our job as Christian educators, I think our job as managers, our job as parents, is to be a person who reveals to other people that deep inside of them something is valuable. Maybe even the thing that I have felt is the most worthless thing about them. To see that it's worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. That's what Elliot did for me. And it's why I wrote the kids book, The Freak Factor for Kids, because when I would do sessions like this, even when it wasn't about kids at all, people would come up to me and talk to me about their kids, even though I was talking about business or talking about leadership. And so I wrote the kids book, and this lady named Stacy bought it for her son Leo because he had ADHD, and he read it and he wrote me a note at age 10. He said, "Thank you, Mr. Rendall, for the book. It made me feel better about who I am." Because I was the first person that saw that deep inside of him something was valuable, the very thing, his ADHD, that everyone had told him was the most worthless thing about him. That it was worth listening to, that it was worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. I learned a lot at Judson. I got good grades at Judson. I met my wife at Judson. But the most important thing that happened to me at Judson was a 5-minute conversation in which somebody told me that everything about my identity that completely defined who I was as a person for 19 years of my life maybe wasn't true. And that I had a future that was far brighter than I ever thought possible if only I could see what somebody else saw inside of me that I'd been told wasn't there. That's our job. And that's why I do these presentations, even when we're in lockdown, even when I'm not making money, even when I can't travel, because I hope that when you're done, you become a person who reveals to other people that deep inside of them something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch, because what makes us weird also makes us wonderful, and what makes us weak also makes us strong. I know I went way over my time. I started freaking out there.
No.
I enjoyed talking with you all, and thanks for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and get back to it. All right, Karen, sorry I blew through my time. Like I said, I don't normally get to talk to Christian audiences, so I have that presentation down pat, and it's the shorter version of it, but I kept taking my Christian detours there to kind of give some of that perspective.
Well, as you were describing your childhood and going to a basically fundamentalist Christian school, and so you can see everything was tied to your soul, but now with the schools, when they have the resources in place, it's what's happened after the analysis. All the examination is done, and they have basically described what has happened. So you have a prescribed plan through the IEP or 504, but you don't have teachers that will readily put that plan in place. So therefore, you still have kids that are set aside or told that they will never accomplish anything, or they're disrupted in the classrooms. And so that's a huge issue that the elementary schools are dealing with.
Yeah, well, and even the plan itself, right? Even the diagnosis itself. I mean, when you tell somebody at a young age they have a problem that needs fixing, when in fact you could argue that there's a system that's broken that makes it impossible for certain people to succeed, right? I mean, is it really possible that the many millions of people we've identified with ADHD all have ADHD, and 30 years ago nobody did, right? Is that really possible? Or is it much more likely that what we value is sitting still, paying attention to things that are hardly worth paying attention to, not moving, not being active? Whereas back in Abraham Lincoln's day, he was criticized for being a book reader, for being lazy and not being out there working hard in the fields like a good kid would. People would pull their kids out of school at a young age because you don't need that education. Just get out there and work hard.
Yeah.
And now if you gave a lot of kids the opportunity to go do something physical, they'd be very productive and no one would call them ADHD. I use that as an example in my talks. You know, no coach ever sends a kid home from athletics practice and goes, oh my gosh, your kid just won't stop running and running and running. They're just all the activity. They just really need to calm it down. It's a situation that rewards them. So we blame the kid instead of blaming the environment. And I think that's one of the mistakes as well. But you're right. Some people, we don't even bother with the plan or we don't follow through on the plan because we're like, what would it really help anyway? But I think there's a deeper problem that we even see them as being damaged. There was a lady in St. Louis who came up to me after the talk and she goes, my kid has an IEP and we're constantly being called into the principal's office. And finally she said, I just walked in one day and I said, yep, he talks a lot. Maybe he'll grow up to be a talk show host. Let's move on. And I walked out. And that's alignment, right? That's alignment and that's appreciation. It's all those things. She's like, this doesn't have to be the end of the world. Let's think about a different future. But we have these very narrow bands that we see value in and we predict futures for people when we have absolutely no idea what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, if you have a few minutes, I'm just going to give it to the floor. If there are any comments, feel free to share. Absolutely. Questions?
Yeah, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat or you can just say them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily have a question, but just thank you. This is super helpful. As you know, I'm still at Judson. I teach there. I've been there as a student. I started there in 1996. So yikes, I've been there a long time. But
that was the year I left. I finished in 95.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And you talking about Elliot, everybody needs an Elliot. Everybody needs an Elliot. He is amazing.
Yeah.
But one of the things that it just has been so helpful to hear this is, you know, as somebody who is an educator, right, there are particular students I've had in classes where I just get so exasperated by them. And this is so helpful then to reframe, okay, what is this? Because there is something there. And, you know, you don't want to diminish people and you want to encourage them, but it's being able to switch that mind frame. And so the stories that you did about your daughter, that was so great for us to be able to think through, okay, what does that mean? Because, you know, everything seems so obvious to us, like, she's just a troublemaker. And instead to be able to think through, okay, what is the flip side of that? Because there is. And so this has been great. I am actually very encouraged by it. Actually, Dr. Love, I asked her to be a guest speaker for our mentors who welcome our incoming freshmen. And this is something that we can talk with them about, is to say, you know, you're going to come across and encounter some peers that are just different than you. And you may not make that connection with them, but if we can help them, right, to identify what some of these things are.
David, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, and I can hear Jamie.
Is probably mine.
Yep.
Oh, I lost the connection here.
Yeah, you're okay. A couple of resources, Jamie, in the book and on my website, there's an assessment both for students and for just anyone in general. Okay. And the last page is the weakness right next to the corresponding strength, and there's 52 of them. So when you're in class, you can actually, like, you could just be like, this person's really irritating me because of this. And you don't have to guess or figure it out like we did with my daughter. I've sort of done some of that work ahead of time. But the other thing, too, to be fair, about two things. Number one, it's okay to not like someone's behavior. And it is okay to define some behaviors as wrong, right? But one of the things we can do is say, I don't like it, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. And that's one of the things I think we really struggle with. So we can say, in the classroom right now, I don't really appreciate what this person is doing, but that doesn't make the behavior wrong. So for example, if somebody yells at me or challenges me when I used to be a professor, and by the way, I did my first part-time teaching before I was a full-time professor at Judson, I would drive an hour and a half south to Rockford or to Elgin to teach in the leadership program or the human services program. But if somebody, for example, I shared a Martin Luther King quote one time, and I said in his I Have a Dream speech, he said we could go to jail together. And I was talking about the cost of reaching for a valuable purpose, and that oftentimes we don't want to talk about the cost, we just want to talk about how great it's going to be. Right. And I said, he did it. He said, we can go to jail together. And I said, he lost some people there, right? They were like, oh, we'll go to the mountaintop. We're going to live together in brotherhood. I don't want to go to jail. Yeah. The next week, one of my black female students, and oftentimes when I taught at the University of Phoenix, I was the only man in the room. I was oftentimes the only white person in the room. And she came up to me and she was very serious and she was upset. And she said, Dave, you know, I appreciate what you were trying to do, but those words are not in that speech. And I think you misrepresented that. And I don't appreciate that. And I think it's important, you know, and I want you to know that bothered me. And so I panicked a little bit because if you, I mean, you know, my book, if you don't have integrity, you know, as a speaker, as a teacher. And so I pulled up the speech, the transcript of the speech, and I looked through it with her and I found the spot that it was in. I was worried I wouldn't, but I was confident in what I said and I shared it with her. But then I didn't want her to think that I was saying, see, I'm right and you were wrong, so shut up and don't question me again. And so when we finished, I said, but let me make something really clear. I said, if you ever hear anything that you think I'm saying that isn't true, I want you to bring it up again. Because I don't want to say anything that isn't true. And sometimes I'm just mistaken. And I'd rather have that, find out about that now than have that go into the future. And then I told the whole class without referencing her at all, but I talked about what happened without making her, you know, the subject of it. And I said the same thing to them. If you ever hear anything, but I also said another thing. I said, if you want to challenge me about anything, I said, I'd love to hear it, because if you yell at me about something, it means a bunch of things. It means you listened to what I had to say to begin with. Yeah. It means you thought about it, and you thought about it enough to have a challenging response to it. And that's more than some people are doing in class, isn't it? Yeah. They're balancing their checkbook. They're looking at their phone. If you're yelling at me, you at least did a few things that other people didn't do. And so I can sometimes see those negative behaviors as positives. But the last thing I want to say is that situations do matter, and you're teaching college, right? And so I did the freak factor a bunch of times for my students. In fact, that's where it started. And one time the students the next week said, okay, Dave, great. You said we don't have to do things we don't like to do if it doesn't fit with our strengths. We don't like tests and we don't like papers. So if you were being consistent, you would shut it down with the papers and the speeches. And I said, you're close. I said, but you haven't thought this through. I said, you voluntarily signed up to go to college, and the certificate you get is certifying that you have certain skills, including the ability to speak, and that you have this knowledge. And so if you want a college degree, that's alignment, you have to learn those skills. If you think it's not a fit, that's great. College isn't for everybody. Drop out and pursue a career that doesn't require you to know those things or to speak in public. But you're wrong telling me that I can't require this of you in this situation. And that was another mistake a student makes. She said, this was great. I only did half the presentation. I was going to do the second half the next week. She goes, I had my performance evaluation from my boss. I told him I'm not fixing any of these weaknesses. Dave told me I don't have to, and he's really smart, you know. I said, no, that's not, you forgot about alignment. You're in that job. If you want to keep that job, you have to do the things required by that job, right? So just so you know, I'm not telling you that your students don't have requirements. You can't require things of people. But that's another example. One of the reasons I don't teach anymore is because I hated grading papers. And so this one guy, after my talk, you know, talked to me about that. He's like, well, Dave, you just got to, you know, overcome procrastination and eat that frog. And in other words, avoidance isn't a realistic thing. You just have to suck it up and fight through. And I said, no. I said, my goal is to keep speaking and develop that part of my business to the point that I can quit teaching and never grade another paper again for the rest of my life. I want permanent procrastination. And I was able to do that, but I wasn't able to tell my school, I'm not grading papers because I don't want to. That's a situation that requires grading papers. Does that make sense? but I can have a goal to find better alignment and put myself in a situation where I no longer have to do that, right? And so some of those things are nuances, but they really matter for those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Okay. Diana, Eddie, Sienna?
Hey, it's Sienna. How's it going?
Good.
Awesome.
Good. Thank you so much for having this. I am excited that you're on here. One of the things that I have come to find is I have a child who's gifted, and she's had the privilege of going to a gifted school, and she's been there for the last 3 years. But as a parent, you know, she's learning, she's finding new ideals and things like that. But being a parent who is new to the gifted world, I find that a lot of parents are shunning away other kids who are a distraction, like you say, who won't sit still, you know, who talk a lot and things like that. And there's a certain thing called twice exceptional, right? You have these kids who are very, very smart and intelligent, and they may have some sort of underlying disability.
That sounds familiar, like something we may have just been talking about, Sienna.
Yeah. So my question is, how do we change people's perspective or the framework of individual weaknesses when, you know, they have these strengths? Like, what do we need to do as a society or, you know, mainstream media to like say, you know, what can we do to straighten these weaknesses and think about those things?
Yeah. Part of it, I don't know that we change those bigger things. One of the concepts in the Freak Factor, which is, or in the 4 Factors of Effective Leadership, which is based on something initially I read in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is we sort of start from the inside out, right? That we have to manage ourselves, build relationships with others in order to change the world. And so I don't think we necessarily try to change society. We try to change the classroom, not even the school. We try to influence that particular teacher. And if we can't, I don't try to change the dress code at my kid's school, but I tell them I don't care about the dress code and I don't care if they get in trouble for it. And when they complain about it, I say that's just the dress code and there's nothing we can do about it, right? But I don't punish them, and I don't act as though it's a big deal, because I don't believe that those things matter. I'm here in a t-shirt and I have tattoos and I'm wearing pink headphones. I dress like a child and I'm a 46-year-old man. And so I think that we try to do it person by person. And when we can't, again, you look at the situation, you say, my daughter is probably gifted, but the way we handled it is we skipped her a grade. And then we started her with online school. She goes to school through Liberty University, and she has for all of high school, and she'll graduate high school next year with an associate's degree from college. So she'll graduate a year ahead of time from high school with a 2-year degree from college. And so we don't need anybody to care about her behavior. We don't need anybody to agree with the way she lives her life. She does 16 hours of gymnastics a week. It's kind of like the SPECIALISTERNE story. We've created a world where she can be herself regardless of what society thinks, regardless of what, she doesn't have to go to a classroom and have anybody be upset because she likes to move around a lot. And when she does gymnastics 16 hours a week, she gets out plenty of energy and she doesn't bother anybody. And we don't need anybody to acknowledge that she's gifted. When she takes the test that proves she's gifted, she had a score on the ACT that would have made her eligible to play college athletics when she was in, 4th grade or something like that. So I think that's the SPECIALISTERNE story. I think part of the answer is don't try to change all those things. Ask yourself how you might be able to either find or create a better situation for your child. It may not be the gifted program. But I think things like education, like sharing that Twice Exceptional book, that's a great book. And it proves something that I said earlier, that strong people always have strong weaknesses too, where there are peaks, there are valleys. One of the incorrect beliefs we have is that there's good people in the sense that people who are good at everything. You all live, or at least Judson's in the Chicago area, and Michael Jordan was huge when I was there, and he's still considered one of the best basketball players of all time. But some people will say things like he was the greatest athlete of all time. But he's not. He's not good at bobsledding. He's not good at tennis. He's okay at golf. He was not good enough at baseball, and he tried to even get it to the major leagues. He isn't the greatest athlete of all time. He was very good at basketball. And outside of basketball, he's a gambler. He's a terrible general manager and owner for the Charlotte Hornets. We're cursed with him. They're the worst team in the history of the NBA. They're absolutely terrible. He's not necessarily a good family person. He gave a speech that alienated pretty much everybody in the athletics world when he was put into the Hall of Fame. He's good at basketball, and he's awful at a lot of things. Steve Jobs was an amazing, terrible at a bunch of other things. And so we live in a world where we like to think, it's why we pay attention to what celebrities think about politics. It's the reason that we pay attention to all sorts of things. We think that good people are good people, and that if you're good at some things, you're probably good at most things. And we fail to acknowledge this reality. So I think the only answer that I have is, I've been on a mission to do this for 15 years. I think you just make it your personal mission to communicate that to people, to try to educate people. But more than that, you don't delay what your daughter needs for the world to come around to it. You either find it or you make it. And I think in our world today, especially with what's happening with this pandemic, there's so many personalized learning situations that you can create. And there's so many opportunities out there that you don't have to be locked into a situation where someone's going to tell you either they're going to ignore what's wrong that needs to get better, or they're going to make a big deal out of something that doesn't have to be a big deal. And so I realized I had an unconventional work career and business. And so when my daughter asked to do homeschool, we found an unconventional opportunity for her to live her own life. She also does a sport that isn't offered at school, right? So everything about her life is unconventional, and we give her the freedom to do that. So I think at the very least, that's where it starts. And I don't know that we always fix those other things, but I think you can, connect with Nancy Smith-Binger, who used to be involved with the RISE program. She has a son with Down syndrome, and she's connected with an organization that helps people with disabilities, not necessarily that are also gifted, but she believes in that the importance of valuing someone regardless of what we can see as a potential negative in them. And she's probably connected to a larger world of people who see disabilities maybe from different perspectives. Have the person who wrote that book, Twice Gifted, come on Friday Night Talk. I probably said that wrong, but whatever we're doing here. And do the presentation. Have that person come speak to the college, to the professors in a chapel, and speak to the students. Invite that person to speak to the school, share a TED Talk by the person who wrote that book, share my TEDx presentation. So I think this is it doesn't work. It works. It doesn't fix everything, but it's all we really have at some point, is to say, what can I do to change these things in a small way, and hopefully eventually they'll get fixed in a larger way. And it does work. It just takes time. So for me now, even with this lockdown, I'm speaking to people in Oman. I'm speaking to people in South Africa. I'm speaking to people in Malaysia. And there's people who, just the other day, I got a note from a teacher who's doing something different in Australia because they saw an interview I did on the internet. So I think even just you becoming an advocate for it and sharing this information, and being like Thorkill Son, refusing to back down and have somebody tell you that something's true that isn't, and really advocating for that, even when, and this is where you get into your own situation, someone's going to say you're a troublemaker when you're being an activist, right? And that's a valuable thing that our society needs, and yet we love to define it negatively.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Diana, Eddie? Quiet.
It's also okay to be quiet and shy. Quiet and shy people on the assessment are thoughtful and reflective, and that's fine. And we need to value that more in our meetings at work and places like that. We oftentimes badger people into participating and being involved because we value that, and we should, but we should also value being involved in different ways. So like I tell leaders, let people send you an email afterwards with their thoughts, because that person was oftentimes seeing things you missed because everybody was so busy talking, right? Mm-hmm. Have a one-on-one meeting with that person later in the day or on a different day where they can download the kind of their perspective on things. Give that person more information ahead of time so they can respond. So that's not always the truth, but that's one example of where a weakness and a strength can kind of go together sometimes.
That's good. It was good. But David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I can't tell you.
Anytime I get to talk to people outside of my house, come on, this what a blessing.
We'll have to do it again.
Absolutely, sign me up.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Indeed. And thank you so much. These books, honestly, this book for your kids, please get it. Invest in this book. It's amazing. It is amazing. And then this one right here. I don't have the goldfish one.
That's brand new. Pink goldfish. Yeah, pink goldfish.
This one is good as well. So guys, thank you so much. And David, I'm gonna post this video on #Friday Night Chats on YouTube.
Perfect. And I just put my website into the chat, drendall.com. It's got the kids book as a video because I'm trying to share that with as many people as possible, even if they can't buy the book, and have teachers be able to use it with their kids, like in elementary school and things like that. And so that video's on there. There's a 30-minute version of my Freak Factor talk from Conscious Capitalism. Karen was asking about that earlier from an event that I did there. There's a video that I did for TEDxMcHenry, not too far away from you all, on oppositioning, how doing the opposite of something that seems good can also be good. And then there's some information on the 4 factors of effective leadership as well. So there's a ton of free stuff. The assessment's on the website as well. And again, totally free. You can use it with your students. You can use it with kids, share it with teachers, all those kinds of things. So take advantage of that.
Okay. All right, then. Everybody's good?
Thank you. Thank you.
All is well. I will post that information on the website. And once again, thank you so much, David.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye-bye.